Hey everyone, welcome to today's video. My name's Stephanie, and today I have the most whimsical collection to share with you from Cirque called Far, Far Away. So this collection features 8 polishes in their new shimmergraphic formula that they introduced not that long ago. If you aren't familiar though, it is basically a combination of shimmers and intense holographic sparkle. So as always, I will save more of my thoughts at the end after comparisons. For now, let's get into the swatches. The first shade we have is Radiant Realm, which is described as a sheer gold pearl shimmer with an intense scattered hollow sparkle. So I would say that this one is a little bit more of a crelly kind of formula. It's definitely pretty sheer, especially on the first coat where you barely get a wash of the base color, but you definitely get a ton of the shimmer and the hollow sparkle, even though I feel like the hollow is not really picking up that well, but I'll get to that in a minute. Formula-wise, this was super easy to work with, as were the other polishes in this collection. I would say it does build up nicely in 2 coats. You obviously still see a lot of nail line, so it's one of those preference things. I could see myself wearing this in 2 coats, but I'm going to be building it up in 3 coats just to show you how that looks. It definitely gets more opaque, but it still shows a tiny bit of nail line, so you might want a blurring base coat if that bothers you. But what bothered me was the lack of hollow sparkle. I mean, to be fair, it picked up a little bit better in real life, but it still was subtle compared to the rest. Next up we have Last Unicorn, and this is a sheer white polish with indigo to purple shimmer and that same intense scattered hollow. So the base in this one is definitely a lot more sheer considering it's a white. I would say it's still like that crelly finish, maybe borderline jelly because of how sheer it is. But like the last one, the shimmer is definitely super bright and you do get a lot of that holographic sparkle. And I'm not sure if you can even really tell in my swatch where you can see the actual glitter particles for the hollow. It's just a lot bigger and more noticeable, I found, than the last shade. But I know the hollow is hard to capture anyway under my desk lighting, and so sorry I didn't have time to film some sunlight clips for these, but it's definitely a lot more present in this polish and the rest of them. So back to the application, as you saw, it was still very sheer on the second coat, and doing a third helped a bit, but there's still a lot of noticeable nail line. So again, would recommend a blurring base coat if you're not a fan of this, or layering it over a white polish. The next shade in the collection is called True Love's First Kiss, and this is a sheer cool pink polish with a sparkling aqua shimmer and that same intense scattered hollow. So obviously I was most excited about this one because it is just the daintiest, prettiest shade that immediately gives me fairy vibes. I love it so much. I would say this one had a pretty similar formula to the last shade, where the base was super sheer, like you barely get that wash of pink on the first coat, but again you see a ton of that shimmer and hollow, so it is noticeable on your nail, but you obviously want to build this up. I think it starts to look nice and kind of glassy or almost cellophane-y on that second coat, so I'm a fan of that look. But of course we're going to be building this up in 3 coats just to show you how that looks, and it does build up a little nicer where you get more of that pink color, which I think is so pretty, especially in contrast with the shimmer. But as you can see, there is a ton of nail line, so I can see how this polish might not be for everybody, but it is definitely for me. Next we have Pixie Holo, and this is a sheer periwinkle polish with green to pink color shifting shimmer and an intense scattered hollow. So no surprise, this was another favorite from the collection. I am just such a sucker for these soft periwinkle bases, especially with an intense greenish golden shimmer. It is just so magical to me. I feel like it reminds me of transparent butterfly wings or something. I don't even know if that's real, but it just gives me such fantasy vibes and I love it. So as you probably noticed, the formula on this one was a little bit more on the opaque side, or at least more on the crelly side compared to the more jelly finishes we saw with the last two shades. So I ended up getting pretty nice coverage on the second coat here. I personally wouldn't mind wearing this in 2 coats, but again, I'm building this up in 3 just to show you how opaque it gets. And I would say it's most similar to the first shade where it's near full opacity and you can barely see a hint of nail line in extreme angles. So I would say this is a solid 2 to 3 coater depending on your nail length. But yeah, this one had such a pretty shift with that shimmer, like in the extreme angles where it changes to pink. I just think it's so ethereal and magical. I really love this shade. So getting into the darker shades of the collection, this next one is called Elixir of Everlasting Life, and it's a deep emerald green polish filled with dazzling blue to pink to orange color shifting shimmer, and of course that same intense hollow sparkle. So formula-wise, as you can probably tell on the first coat, this one is definitely leaning more towards that jelly side, where it does provide pretty even coverage for the most part, but it just has that very squishy, translucent look to it. And it kind of stayed that way on the second coat as well, which I wasn't expecting since it's a little bit of a darker color, so I thought it was just going to reach opacity. But I still think it's wearable on 2 coats, like having that squishy jelly look, but filled with all of that sparkle. It's really pretty, but for this one, I decided to do a 3rd coat just to see how the base builds up. And I would say, again, it's like nearly fully opaque, like maybe in certain angles you can see some nail line, but I love how deep this one got on the 3rd coat. It is just so enchanting. The next polish in the collection is Dragon's Dungeon, and this is described as an oxblood red with indigo shifting shimmer and the intense hollow sparkle. So I don't know if I would agree with this color description, especially of the base, because when I think of oxblood, I think of a super deep brownish or almost blackened red, but this kind of feels just like a magenta to me. So I'm not sure if it's just the blue shimmer that's making it look that way. Obviously, it's going to look a lot lighter when it's the most sheer on the first coat, and building it up in 2 or 3 coats is going to deepen the color. But yeah, I just don't know if I would agree with red. This just feels very purple to me. Either way, however you describe this color, it is absolutely gorgeous and so rich and pigmented. I actually stopped here at 2 coats, but I guess you could do a 3rd if you wanted it to be a little deeper. Next we have Grimoire Glitz, or as I've been calling it, Gilmore Girls. I don't know why, just as soon as I saw the name on the label, I just read it as Gilmore Girls, so it's my unofficial name. But this is a slate gray polish with pink to gold to green shifting shimmer and that same holographic sparkle. So formula-wise, this one was at first I thought similar to the pink or the white because it was pretty sheer on the first coat, but seeing how much it built up on the second coat, I think maybe it's closer to Pixie Holo, the periwinkle, because it just built up a lot easier and I didn't have as much nail line as I thought that I would. So personally, I could see myself wearing this in 2 coats for that slightly squishy or ethereal look, but I still built it up in 3 just to show you how opaque it gets. And this is another one that I would say is like 98% opaque if you care about that. This one has a really cool color shift to it, especially in combination with the base. It's not a color that I would usually go for, but I ended up liking this one. I just thought it was cool. And rounding out the collection is Scorched Sorceress, and this is described as a black polish with dazzling red to gold to green color shifting shimmer and that same intense holographic sparkle. So this is another one, kind of like Dragon's Dungeon, that kind of threw me off with the color description because I was initially reading this almost more as like a brown polish as opposed to black. I guess the fiery kind of shimmer just really warmed up the base color to me, so that's why I was picking up as brown. But obviously, the more coats that you do, the deeper the base is going to get. So in certain angles where you don't see the shimmer, you can start to see that black base coming through. So I ended up just needing 2 coats for this one because again, it's a black base, it builds up really well, and this one had another really cool shift to it. It definitely reminded me of like dragon scales or dragon eggs. And here is the collection lineup. I think this is such a beautiful and ethereal lineup of shades, and I especially love how the first half is very light and whimsical, while the other half is a bit more enchanting and mysterious. Obviously, I have a preference towards the top shades, but the whole set definitely gives me fantasy vibes, and I just think it's so mesmerizing. So moving on to comparisons, I immediately was reminded of Moonbeam when I first saw Radiant Realm. As you can see, they're definitely very similar, where Moonbeam has more of an almost pearlescent white milky base with a gold shimmer, while Radiant Realm is gold all over. And Moonbeam even has that subtle, delicate hollow sparkle, while the hollow is a bit more dense in Radiant Realm, even though I know it doesn't really look like it. So they're not dupes, but super similar. In a similar vein, we of course have to see Last Unicorn next to Mystic Moonstone, which is that white dainty hollow formula with a strong blue shimmer, but I would say the shimmer in Last Unicorn is a little bit darker. Again, it leans a little indigo, and it's a bit brighter in Mystic Moonstone, so I thought a closer comparison would be Mooncat's Heavenmetal from the somewhat recent Misfits collection. That's another sheer milky white base with an intense blue shimmer and this really intense holographic sparkle. But I'm pretty sure the hollow in Mooncat comes from these silver microflakes, while the hollow in Cirque's, shimmergraphic at least, is a micro hex glitter. I could be wrong, I don't have a macro camera to confirm this, and on the nail they virtually look pretty similar, definitely a lot more similar than Mystic Moonstone, so if you have Heavenmetal, I don't think you would need this one. Next, for True Love's First Kiss, I wanted to quickly show this next to Porcelain Plum from the MXM Tune collection this summer. This is a bit more purpley and has almost more of a pearlescent finish, so they aren't dupes, but they're kind of close. Or it's at least the closest pink that I have from Cirque, but a closer pink that I have in my collection is ILNP's Pixie Party from the collection this past spring. They definitely look pretty similar, especially with the pink bases. The main difference that you can see is the shimmer color, where it's blue in Cirque, but more of a green and then shifts to blue in ILNP. But once you see them on the nail, the bases are actually slightly different too, where it's more milky and cool toned on Cirque's side and warmer or just maybe more sheer in general for ILNP. So again, not exact dupes, but very similar. Then for Pixie Holo, I immediately thought of Crying Contest, which was also from the MXM Tune collection. It's another periwinkle crully base, but it has more of a yellowy shimmer that shifts to peach, so it's definitely not the same kind of shimmer that we see in Pixie Holo. If anything, a closer shimmer is actually what we see in Anchors Away, which is this beautiful cornflower blue base, but it has that same kind of greenish shimmer, at least head on, because again, Pixie Holo does shift to a pink and Anchors Away does not. So in a way, I feel like Pixie Holo is kind of like a good combination between Crying Contest and Anchors Away, where it's like the base color of Crying Contest, but then the shimmer of Anchors Away. Next, for Elixir of Everlasting Life, I knew I had to see this next to Ethel from the Kelly Marissa collection, which is another deep green jelly shimmer graphic formula, but this one obviously is very different. The base color is a little bit lighter and more of a true green. There's not as much blue as in Elixir, but the shimmer is also wildly different, where it shifts from pink to yellow instead of blue. For Dragon's Dungeon, I also wanted to show this next to Venetian Sky from the Kelly Marissa collection. It's a similar purple shimmer graphic, but it's like the colors are reversed in this one, where Venetian Sky has more of a blue-purple base with a pinkish shimmer, so they're definitely like sibling polishes for sure. But for whatever reason, when I first swatched Dragon's Dungeon, I was just reminded of Wildberry West, which is like a super deep magenta kind of jelly with a matching blue shimmer. But as you can see, the base is a lot brighter, and it also just does not have as much hollow sparkle, so they are far from dupes. But kind of like other comparisons I shared, I would say that Dragon's Dungeon is kind of like a combination of these two other shades. And lastly, for Grimoire Glitz, I had to see this next to Tahitian Pearl because I almost forgot that I had this one, and I would have been so mad if I didn't include this comparison. Because as you can see, they look super similar in the bottle. They obviously are different on the nail. As the name suggests, Tahitian Pearl is more of a pearlescent finish, so the shimmer is a lot smoother and not as grainy looking, I guess, as Grimoire Glitz, but they're definitely the same kind of color combination, even with the shift in shimmer. So that wraps up my swatches and comparisons for Cirque's new Far, Far Away collection. So as always, I would love to know what your thoughts are on these, even though I feel like I have an idea of what those will be. But as far as my thoughts go, I definitely think this is a gorgeous lineup. I love the whimsical fantasy theme of these, and I think they nailed it so well. Like, I'm not sure if you've seen their mood board that they shared recently, and I also shared it in my stories, but it just fit so well for this collection, which I'm really happy about because you may have seen my disappointment with the last one. That being said, I know that some of the colors are definitely a little familiar to shades that we've seen from Cirque already, and I feel like it's just bound to happen, especially with brands that have been around for several years, where at one point they are just gonna start releasing shades that are basically the same kind of color, but it's just a slightly different formula. We've kind of already seen that with other brands like Mooncat and ILNP, so I'm trying to be like a little forgiving that it just is bound to happen, but I totally get why people who are longtime fans of Cirque or even just like collectors might not be super excited about some of these shades because they just, again, are pretty familiar to certain others. But if for whatever reason you didn't like those original formulas, you thought maybe they were like a little boring or plain, hopefully you will like these because they are obviously a lot more intense with the shimmergraphic formula. The holo just sparkles so beautifully. It just like twinkles in the sun and gives it this glistening, almost wet kind of look, which I know is a weird way to describe it, but I just think it's so pretty. Like, it just has such a glassy, twinkly effect, and I love it so, so much. So as a reminder, I am an affiliate with Cirque, so if you do like anything, you can pick them up at Cirque's website down below and use my code PolishedYogi for 10% off. Big thank you if you do use my code. I appreciate the support, but either way, just make sure to leave your thoughts down below so we can chat about it. But thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!